I'm here today to talk about Parkinson's disease and to help you with it. I can help in ways that your neurologist may not be able to because neurologists are excellent at prescribing medication that can control the symptoms of tremors and stiffness and other problems that you may have. But I'm going to talk about some things you can do to help slow progression, maybe get a better handle on what is going on and how to protect your brain from any further problems. Now, number one is certain foods harbor environmental neurotoxins. They damage and kill the very cells that produce the dopamine. Now, Parkinson's disease is when dopamine is low in the body, and that makes it difficult to control tremors and can make movement stiff and slow. And there's other problems like facial masking and quite a few problems. But tremors are usually one of the most annoying because it's hard to drink things. So we want to look first, I'll tell you about what foods harbor these environmental neurotoxins, and food is the principal way that they are introduced into the body. Other foods can protect your brain cells. They can protect the cells that make dopamine, and I'll be telling you about those foods that are beneficial that you can include more of in your diet. So you have the power to control your diet, and you have the choice. And my role is as educator to help you make a good choice that'll be good. And also, I want to let you know that everyone says, well, we need more protein. But I analyze diets with my own dietary analysis software, the Diet Doctor. And I've been doing this for many decades. And when I analyze diets of people on various types of diets, from raw vegan to the pure carnivore diet, what I notice is that no one is really low on protein. Actually, 3 people over the decades, but it's very, very rare. But too much protein can be a problem for Parkinson's disease because when you have too much protein, it can interfere both with the drugs and also with your own production of dopamine. I want to tell you more about that. The dopamine is mostly made in this orange section of the picture here at the bottom of the brain. The dopamine then goes on to the striatum and initiates movement. This is called the substantia nigra, and the part that makes dopamine is the pars compacta. They have these big Latin names for that. Protecting these cells that make dopamine from death is our goal. If you have fewer cells, then Parkinson's disease tends to get worse. And if you keep losing dopamine-producing cells, then the drugs don't work as well and the disease progresses. If you can hang on to those cells, keep them alive, keep them there, making dopamine, then it's possible to slow progression. The drugs for Parkinson's disease, principally the first line of defense is levodopa, usually with carbidopa. The levodopa can help with tremors. It certainly does. If you have Parkinson's disease, that's one of the ways that neurologists diagnose it is if the levodopa is helping, then it's Parkinson's disease. If it's not helping, then it may be some other type of Parkinsonism and other things may be needed. But the drugs don't slow progression of the disease. They hide the symptoms. That's different. I'm here today to help you to understand how to slow the progression. Now, dietary antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin E, carotenoids, the colorful pigments in fruit, certain minerals like selenium and zinc, manganese, and copper, and polyphenols do slow the death of dopamine-producing cells. So you can do both. You can, take the drugs and also slow the death of the cells that are making the dopamine. How did anyone ever get Parkinson's disease? Did you ever wonder? By the time it's diagnosed, perhaps 50% of your dopamine producing cells have already died off. How did they die off? And what's going to kill the rest of your dopamine producing cells? For those of us who don't have Parkinson's disease, how can we avoid it? By avoiding these environmental contaminants. So I'm going to let you know which foods contain the contaminants that can kill off the dopamine producing cells and slow down that. one study, and you'll see that I have studies at the bottom of most of my screens. This one's from the Annals of Neurology. 110 people were looked at in this population-based study, and they found that the intake of animal fats was strongly related to Parkinson's disease risk. The odds ratio is 5.3, 500% increase in Parkinson's disease and those who ate more animal fat. So perhaps you might consider eating less animal fat or even no animal fat, because animal fats store the pesticides and other organic persistent pollutants that are all over the environment, from the North Pole to the South Pole. I mean, it's fascinating that these are so widespread that even organic meat has similar amounts of these persistent fat-loving chemicals that kill off dopamine-producing cells as the conventionally produced meat. Oh, the book on the screen is a Parkinson's disease cookbook, and that's my wife's cookbook that is available either in paper form or on our website as an ebook for under $10, just to get the information out there. They looked at postmortem studies on Parkinson's disease brains, and they found higher levels of the various organochlorine pesticides. These organochlorine pesticides, in my opinion, should never have been used because they persist almost forever in the environment. Dieldrin is one of them, heptachlor, lindane, there's so many of them, and they all persist. All of these organochlorine pesticides concentrate in fatty tissue. They're lipophilic, fat-loving, both in food animals and in human brains. So there's a small amount in the grass or the grain that the animal is eating. And the animal bioaccumulates this into itself, and then there's more there, maybe 100 times more, maybe even 1,000 times more in the fat of the animal than was in the food that it's eating. Then humans eat the animals, and we bioaccumulate. If we eat those animals, and the animal fat especially, we bioaccumulate, and the fattiest part of our bodies is our brain, and we accumulate those there, and they kill off the cells that make dopamine. So one possible way to go would be to avoid animal fat. Here they looked at lindane in dairy products and eggs. The control graph, as you see in the left, is kind of low. The Alzheimer's graph is not much higher than the control graph, but the Parkinson's patients had much higher lindane. That is a potential cause of Parkinson's disease, and it's been looked at as a contributor. In this study, in the Archives of Neurology, the organochlorine lindane raised the odds of getting Parkinson's disease 4.39 times over normal risk. Potential dietary sources of lindane are milk, eggs, and cheese. There are other pesticides that are concentrated in beef, pork, chicken, turkey, and fish. So animal fat is a problem there. You notice the studies come up with slightly different numbers, one a little over 5 times, one a little under 5 times. But the point of these is to show that there's a much higher risk with more animal fat. Here, I am showing you on this screen on the left, my Parkinson's disease book is Dietary Regulation of Dopamine. I can't tell you everything during this talk today. I'll do my best. But if you have further questions, this book is available on my website, shown here, drsteveblake.com, for under $10. My goal is not to make a lot of money. It's to get the information you need. And the book is heavily footnoted. So if you're interested in something I've said in the book, you can go right to that reference and read the original study, which I recommend. Always check. Those who consume 3 servings of dairy products compared with 1 serving of dairy products per day had an 80% increased risk of Parkinson's disease. Now, I would have liked to see this study with people who consume 3 servings of dairy products compared with no servings of dairy products, but that's harder to find in an American population. 4 cups of milk daily was found to triple the risk of Parkinson's disease. There are, however, many other milks out there that aren't made with dairy. There's soy milk and rice milk and almond milk and all kinds of delicious creamy milks that you can try instead of dairy milk. And the advantage is because they're plants, they don't bioaccumulate these pesticides from the environment. Another study on milk fat, it increases inflammation. One of the ways that dairy products can cause faster Parkinson's disease progression is because dairy products reduce uric acid levels in the bloodstream. Now, we think of uric acid as having something to do with gout and not as a good thing usually. But amazingly enough, uric acid is an antioxidant that is very common in the human body. And when it's reduced, greatly reduced by dairy products like milk, then we have more oxidation. And oxidation is the principal method that these dopamine producing cells in our brain are killed off. And of course, dairy products are contaminated with neurotoxic pesticides. Now, this study was very interesting. A 2020 study in the Journal of Movement Disorders. For every 1 ounce slice of cheese consumed, Parkinson's disease risk increased by 36 to 48%. Now, I translated that for you into a 12-inch pizza with 6 slices. 200 to 300% increased risk of Parkinson's disease with these dairy products. There are alternative cheeses on the market, or as my wife points out, you can always use hummus or nut butter or something besides cheese that's even healthier than an alternative cheese to take the place in a sandwich or a salad or whatever you're making. Dairy products in this study in neurology increase the risk of Parkinson's disease 2.3 times. The neurotoxic contaminants are one of the main reasons. There are other reasons too. Polychlorinated biphenyls, they've been linked to higher PD risk. Those are called PCBs, and they're very common cause of both cancer and also Parkinson's disease. In yellow at the bottom of the screen, I've highlighted that you could avoid dairy products to slow the progression of Parkinson's disease. It's easier now than it ever has been, and you might want to consider that. People with the lowest dairy product consumption were 60% less likely to get Parkinson's disease in this very large study. And of course, these studies are tricky because the lowest consumption of dairy products might mean 2 or 3 times a day. So really, it would be better if these studies could compare to no dairy product consumption. But as I mentioned, that's kind of hard to do. But this study looked at, in the journal Oxidative Medicine and Cellular Longevity, looked at the reasons why, the mechanisms of actions. One is excess protein, and I'll be talking about that coming up. 2 is dieldrin, lindane, and the other neurotoxic pesticides and leftover environmental contaminants. The lower uric acid I mentioned, and endotoxins. When milk is raw, it grows bacteria. And so they sterilize the milk and kill the bacteria so no one gets sick. However, the killed off bacteria, the shells of these gram-negative bacteria still exist. And I've done some studies into that and published quite a few studies on lipopolysaccharides, also known as endotoxins. These are the leftover shells of those bacteria that are killed off. They trigger our immune system, and they cause a great deal of inflammation in the brain, resulting in oxidation and brain cell death. Not, of course, only in the Parkinson's areas that make dopamine, but in the thinking areas that help us with memory and our ability to think clearly. Those are some of the main concerns with milk and cheese and other dairy products. Here are a couple of bar graphs. With the white bar, if the study, in each of the little lines to the right of the right bar on both of these, if they're to the right of the bar, they mean increased risk of Parkinson's disease. If they're to the left of the bar, they mean reduced risk. But there are no studies showing reduced risk of milk and cheese. But every study done has shown an increased risk of milk and cheese. I like to look at these meta-studies because they help me to understand that it's not one outlying data point that is a problem. It's showing that all of the studies considered in both of these meta-studies are showing that dairy products are a problem. 80% less risk of Parkinson's disease in men who consumed less dairy products. I wonder how much it would be if they consumed none. So one other technique you can make to adapt your diet is to eat more organic food and less sprayed foods. Many of the pesticides are toxic to humans, and they do persist on the food. Some foods are more prone to this. They call them the dirty dozen, and foods like blueberries or uh, bell peppers are sprayed right on the surface of the food that we're eating. And even, these pesticides are designed so that they don't wash off in the rain, and they don't wash off well in the sink either. Many of the studies use soap and water to wash them off, and they're still there when they test them. So it's best to avoid conventionally grown food if it has insecticides and pesticides sprayed on it, fungicides. A large meta-study looked at 46 studies, and the risk was 62% higher with more exposure to pesticides. Job-related exposure to pesticides is a big hazard for Parkinson's disease, and you see rates much higher, 2 to 4 times as high in people who work with pesticides. Some of the pesticides, paraquat and permethrin, rotenone is especially high risk. Rotenone is such high risk as a pesticide that it's used in studies to give rats Parkinson's disease-like symptoms, and then they can test their drugs on those. Now, polychlorinated biphenyls are higher in the brains of people with Parkinson's disease, and these too can be avoided. They accumulate in the brain, they disrupt dopamine, they damage cognitive function, and they increase oxidative stress. And there are even more problems with these. A good review in neurotoxicology is done by Caudle and other authors, and this is a great study. I'd recommend you read if you like to read science. How do polychlorinated biphenyls damage the brain? They lower the production of dopamine. That's exactly what we don't want. If you can make your own dopamine, and I'll be talking about this during our talk today, then you can need perhaps less of the levodopa drugs. This is a good thing because as Parkinson's disease progresses, typically people need more and more of these drugs and then different drugs. And so it's better if you don't progress and don't need more of these drugs, and also less side effects too. Now, I'm going to talk about one big word, biochemical word. I'm a nutritional biochemist, okay? So I have to use some big words sometimes, but I'll try not to do too much. But this is called tyrosine hydroxylase. The way dopamine is made in the brain is tyrosine, an amino acid that's fine in food. It's easy to find. It goes into your brain, and this tyrosine hydroxylase makes levodopa, the very same levodopa that you may be taking as a drug. This levodopa then is made into dopamine. So these things, they disrupt the tyrosine hydroxylase, and then to make levodopa into dopamine, you need aromatic amino acid decarboxylase. You don't have to remember that one. But so there's 2 steps, and it disrupts both steps of making dopamine in the brain. There's another thing, is that dopamine is sequestered in the cell, so it doesn't damage the cell and cause oxidative damage to dopamine-producing neurons and killing the neurons. Well, these polychlorinated biphenyls do that too. They disrupt that. In 1977, they stopped making these very persistent polychlorinated biphenyls and switched to polybrominated diphenyl ethers. They also persist quite a bit. They biomagnify in animal fat and accumulate and biomagnify in the brain if you eat animal fat. The damage to dopamine-making neurons is strikingly similar to that of the polychlorinated biphenyls. The bottom line, these polybrominated diphenyl ethers were found to impair motor function. You can avoid them. Here's how. The biggest source by far was fish oil. Now, some fish oil manufacturers say that they take out all of the contaminants, and some do try to take out some of the contaminants. I think all is too big a word. Very difficult to separate these from the fish oil. One step better, if you are needing to take fish oil, would be to take algae-derived DHA and EPA instead of fish oil-derived. You get a lot less of the organic pollutants that way, the polychlorinated biphenyls and the PB, both of them. Fish was number 2. So fish is heavily contaminated in this day and age with polychlorinated biphenyls. Eggs also contaminated. Dairy product to a lesser degree, but still some. And sadly, baby food was found to be contaminated along with beef. Now, there's some residual in vegetable oil, not a lot, but fruits, vegetables, cereals, grains, beans, nuts and seeds, these are extremely low. So they're safe. They don't damage your brain. Now, on the bottom, I have a graph that is one of many studies that have looked at organic food and compared it with conventional food and say, is it safer in regards to polychlorinated biphenyls, and the OC there means organochlorine pesticides, those ones that damage the brain and kill off dopamine producing cells. So on that bottom graph, there's a pink line that I put in across horizontally. That's the safe limit. You'll notice that all of the bars are much above the safe limit. For lamb, the conventional was much higher than the safe limit, and the organic lamb was even higher yet. For the chicken, they were pretty similar, both about double the safe limit. For beef, similar, but the organic food actually had more of these persistent organic pollutants in it. So it is not enough to eat organic chicken and beef, and even wild deer, wild animals are still exposed to these pollutants that are everywhere, and they bioaccumulate them too. Studies vary on those. If they're near a populated area, they get more. If they're really remote, they may get slightly less. But areas like Maui has a history of heptachlor use. Heptachlor is an organochlorine pesticide that was heavily sprayed on pineapples before it was banned because it got into the dairy products. They fed the pineapple tops that were sprayed to the dairy cows, and then people eating the dairy products on Maui were getting high levels of those. It came to a point where the women's breast milk was unsafe because of the concentration of these pollutants in their breast milk from eating dairy products. It's a sad thing that these are in our environment, but this is the world we live in, and we can avoid them. So the trick is not to eat organic meat, whether it's chicken or beef or pork or fish. You're going to need to actually not eat them if you want to avoid these contaminants. And it is your choice, and I understand it can be a difficult choice. There are many alternative meats out there. There's a Gardein brand fish fillets and frozen sections that actually is quite delicious and can kind of substitute for fish if you're in the mood for that, but it doesn't have organochlorine pesticides. May not be the healthiest thing on the planet, but at least it's not going to be killing off your brain cells. Mercury is another contaminant in fish that is a neurotoxin, and the biggest source of mercury for people in America is, well, tuna fish, typically. That's where people get the most mercury. Other large fish also have a lot of mercury in them. The methyl mercury is the most toxic form of mercury, although the ethyl mercury is also quite toxic. Methyl mercury binds to cysteine, and then it can be transported right into the brain. And exposure to mercury can damage not only the function of where we make dopamine in the substantia nigra, but also into the striatum where our movements are initiated. Also, the mercury can damage the mitochondria, the energy factories in our cell, and most strikingly, lower dopamine production. Now, here's another contaminant that's found principally in seafood. It's made by a type of algae, and it's beta-N-methylamino-L-alanine, BMAA. This was found to be concentrated in certain foods in the Pacific, and people who lived on islands where these foods were eaten and they ate a lot of this BMAA had extremely high rates of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, neurological disorder, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. It's made by cyanobacteria in the seawater, and it's definitely concentrated in crab, shrimp, fish, or shellfish, pretty much sea life. Brains from Parkinson's disease patients had very high levels of this BMAA, even when compared to Alzheimer's and ALS patients, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. It can damage and kill dopamine-producing cells and increase Lewy bodies. I'll mention Lewy bodies here in a few minutes. They're associated with damaged cognition, which is possible to be accentuated in Parkinson's disease sometimes. The BMAA has a structural similarity to glutamate. Glutamate is the principal excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. Too much glutamate is damaging to the brain and also damaging to our peace of mind, principally through excitotoxicity, point 2, that can wind up killing brain cells. It damages the mitochondria, so energy production can be less. When energy production in a dopamine-producing cell is disrupted, that cell can die. Then you have one less cell. You don't want that. Can damage and kill dopamine-producing cells and the misfolding in the Lewy bodies. What can you do? You could avoid crab, shrimp, fish, or shellfish. I certainly do. After learning all of this, I simply wouldn't want to eat them. I understand that they can be tasty and all that, but we have to protect ourselves and our loved ones. Now, Harmane's interesting. It's this study in neurotoxicology is really good. They looked at elevated blood Harmane levels, and in the graph you see from top to bottom, in Parkinson's disease, Harmane levels were higher even at the lowest in Parkinson's disease than they were at the highest in normal people without Parkinson's disease. So definitely higher in Parkinson's disease. What Harmane does and norharmane, they increase tremors. There's another tremor. Parkinson's disease is associated with movement tremors. So if you're tremoring while you're moving, then this is a Parkinson's disease symptom. However, there's another tremor, essential tremor, where you're tremoring when you're not moving. This is very, very common. Some of you listening may have essential tremor. Harmane's a big contributor to the tremors in both, and you can avoid it. Beer, number one, has the highest amount of Harmane, and cigarettes, high exposure to Harmane, and the exposure is very bad. And then there's pork loin, broiled beef, cheese, bacon, and chicken. So if you look at the Harmane in those are all very high levels of Harmane. Another reason why you want to avoid these foods outside of the contaminants that are damaging, both killing off the cells that make dopamine and killing off the enzymes that make our own dopamine from levodopa. Oh, I want to mention the home use of pesticides can also increase the risk of Parkinson's disease. This study in occupational environmental medicine showed that pesticide use in the home or on food increased the risk of Parkinson's disease. Also, organophosphate insecticides doubled the risk in the home. Now, organophosphate pesticides are pesticides that they work. Okay, I'm going to explain this. Stay with me on this. It's slightly technical for a minute. When our brain cells communicate, they often use acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter. So one cell will transmit acetylcholine to trigger the next cell. Now, that acetylcholine is eaten up by an enzyme so that it doesn't keep triggering the next cell. Okay, it wants to trigger it once, but not over and over and over. Well, these organophosphate insecticides eliminate that enzyme so that the brain cells keep triggering over and over the next one. So if that happens in an insect, its lungs and muscles contract and can't ever relax again, so it dies. Now, there are non-toxic alternatives to using pesticides in your home. We live in Maui, and there's lots of insects around here. And so we use things like boric acid and cinnamon. Ants really don't like cinnamon, so a little bit of, actually just powdered cinnamon stops the ants in their tracks and they go away. Boric acid is great for cockroaches, and there are non-toxic alternatives you might want to explore because the home use of pesticides is also a problem with Parkinson's disease. Now, I've talked about a lot of foods that make Parkinson's disease more likely, increase the risk, and increase the progression. What about foods that are better, that help, that reduce the progression and reduce the risk? Soy genistein is one of these foods. Here's some edamame that's cooked in the shell soybeans, usually available organically produced. And I do recommend only organic soy products because of the heavy pesticide use that's common on them. But the organic edamame would be an excellent source, a nice whole food with plenty of fiber and protein and all the good things. Soy genistein treatment protected the dopamine-producing neurons from injury. Now, I asked you to remember tyrosine hydroxylase, and here it is again. Genistein restored tyrosine hydroxylase. Remember, when tyrosine, an amino acid, gets into the brain, it's made into levodopa, the same levodopa you may take as a drug, and then that's made into dopamine. So by restoring the tyrosine hydroxylase, you're allowing your own body to make its own levodopa. It helps to restore dopamine in the striatum. So it helps the dopamine get to its end in the striatum that initiates movement. Organic soy is a good source of genistein and diastein. They're both anti-inflammatories. They're very helpful also with Alzheimer's disease and keeping your brain sharp to reduce neuroinflammation. I've written several papers on that. By the way, if you're interested in my academic papers, if you go to my website, drsteveblake.com, just under the pictures, you'll see a recent research, and they're all free open source, and they're a little difficult to read, as science typically is, but I do my best to make it understandable. And you can read about neuroinflammation in Parkinson's disease and also in Alzheimer's disease and how to prevent it. Sesame seeds contain sesamin, which is a heat-activated antioxidant. Very unique. Tahini is shown here, made out of sesame seeds. Delicious and very rich in calcium. Sesamin has a dopamine-enhancing effect, increases this biosynthesis of this tyrosine hydroxylase. Remember the one enzyme I want you to remember today. Tyrosine hydroxylase, so that can then convert tyrosine into levodopa to increase your dopamine in your brain, make your movement smoother, your tremors less. It also has an antioxidant effect. So by increasing superoxide dismutase, it is an antioxidant that protects brain cells from injury and death. Now, that's something that the drugs used for Parkinson's disease don't do. They don't protect the brain cells. This neuroprotection and anti-inflammatory action, I think, is really a nice side effect of sesame seeds and sesamin. Carotenoids are the colorful pigments in foods. Carotenoids can include beta-carotene, the orange pigment in carrots, and alpha-carotene and beta-cryptoxanthin, and there's really quite a few carotenoids. Some of them can be converted to vitamin A, but all of them are antioxidants, and they are fat-soluble antioxidants, okay? This is important because the fat-soluble antioxidants are able to protect our brains, the fatty areas that are damaged. They looked at Parkinson's patients, and they found that these carotenoids were lower. Well, that's an indication that the people were not eating enough colorful fruits and vegetables. Those with more carotenoids had fewer symptoms. Makes you think that if you ate more colorful fruits and vegetables, you might have less symptoms. Higher levels of the carotenoids may reduce both the risk of and the progression of Parkinson's disease. Bottom line, highlighted in yellow on the bottom of this slide, eat plenty of organic fruits and vegetables. That's not so hard to do. Hopefully you have some favorite fruits and vegetables and you can eat even more of those. Flavonoids are found in fruits, especially berries, are very rich in flavonoids. They did a big study, and in biomolecules was reported 130,000 people they followed for 20 years, and they were 40% less likely to develop Parkinson's disease if they consumed more flavonoids. A lot of the common fruits, berries, apples, oranges, all of the fruits have these protective flavonoids. There are a larger class called polyphenols, and that includes flavonoids and many others. And under flavonoids, there's also a lot of subcategories of flavonoids. They're all antioxidant, they're all good for you, they're all found in whole fruits and vegetables. These flavonoid-rich foods protect dopamine neurons from oxidation, inflammation, and cell death. It's just exactly what we want. And isn't this the opposite of the animal fat that is increasing the oxidation, inflammation, and cell death of dopamine-producing cells? Here, we can have the opposite effect Imagine the difference if someone is used to eating a lot of animal fat and very few fruits and vegetables, and they switch over. This could be good. Several reasons why the flavonoids are protective of our brain cells is they activate our own antioxidant enzymes. We have antioxidant enzymes in our body. I'll be talking about antioxidants coming up, but some antioxidants are from food, like vitamin E and vitamin C, and some antioxidants are made in our bodies to protect our bodies from oxidation and cell death. Typically, especially in the brain, superoxide dismutase and glutathione peroxidase are the two main antioxidant enzymes that protect our brain. There are others, but not as relevant in the brain. To make these work, we need certain minerals. We need selenium for glutathione peroxidase, and we need copper, zinc, and manganese for superoxide dismutase. These flavonoids protect the cell membranes from disruption, and they keep dopamine-producing brain cells alive. That's the most important thing. They restore energy in the brain, especially quercetin. Now, quercetin is a flavonoid that is the most eaten flavonoid in America. So it's one you're likely to get the most of if you eat lots of fruits and vegetables. They also inhibit inflammation. They're changing gene expression. So we make less of the inflammatory elements in our body. I won't go into their names right now. Again, if you want more information than I can give you today, my book's on drsteveblake.com. It's under $10 for the ebook, and I encourage you to dig further and dig into those references too. This study was looking at dopamine-producing cells. It was a cell study, and they were kept alive with extracts from berries. They used blueberries, grape seeds, hibiscus, blackcurrant, and mulberry. The extracts are rich in anthocyanins and proanthocyanidins, and these are very protective. The anthocyanins can actually travel through the blood-brain barrier, and they go up into your brain, and they lodge there and protect your brain from cell death, from oxidation and inflammation. So in a way, blueberries and strawberries, and if they have anthocyanins, are likely to be dark. So that would be dark grapes, like red grapes or black grapes, also blueberries and strawberries. The green grapes don't have much of these. In the study that I ran on Alzheimer's disease, we did use blueberries and strawberries as our source of anthocyanins, and we used other dietary changes as well and some nutrients, but the results were very good. The blueberry and grapeseed extract rescued dopamine-producing cells that were in danger of cell death. Now, this is a very important point because it's possible that many of your dopamine-producing cells are teetering on the edge of dying, but not dead. So if they can be rescued, then they can get healthy again and make dopamine, boosting your dopamine and helping your tremors and your movements. This is kind of interesting. The studies show that people who smoke cigarettes get less Parkinson's disease. We all know cigarettes are very damaging to the lungs and increase lung cancer and are very unhealthy in a lot of ways, increased heart disease risk and all that. So I looked for another way to get this nicotinic receptors stimulated besides smoking cigarettes. And I found this fascinating study. This is in the Annals of Neurology. Potatoes, tomatoes, and peppers reduce the risk of Parkinson's disease by 19%. But wait, peppers had the biggest protective effect, cutting risk in half. In those who never smoke, risk was reduced 87%. That's a huge reduction of risk. So it's possible that eating more bell peppers could protect your dopamine-producing cells. Now, the problem is that many of these peppers are heavily sprayed with things that may increase the death of your dopamine-producing cells. So what to do? Only buy them organically grown, grow them yourself, but make sure they're not sprayed with pesticides because that would kind of nullify the beneficial effect. But they can be a delicious addition and can reduce your problems. Now, here's a plant root called ashwagandha. It means strong like horse in Ayurvedic medicine. Its botanical name is Witheria somnifera. It increases dopamine production, interesting, and alleviated gait disorders, very interesting. Many people with Parkinson's disease tell me that when they're walking, they feel like their feet are sticking to the ground. They don't want to, that initial movement of their feet is difficult. A slow walking called bradykinesia and other movement disorders were alleviated with this. Now, the literature on ashwagandha has been studied quite a lot. In this study in the Journal of Aging Research, and also a study in molecules, they really reviewed it thoroughly, looked at the research on it, and the root of ashwagandha, as far as I can tell, I have not seen contraindications or drug interactions. You should do your research yourself and consult your doctor, of course. But alleviating gait disorder sounds nice. The other thing is it's neuroprotective, and this brings a smile to my face because if it's neuroprotective, it's keeping your brain cells alive, and not just the ones for movement, but also the ones for thinking and memory. It reduces the damaging products of fat oxidation. When our fat is oxidized, we can create malondialdehyde, and this oxidation product of fat can damage DNA through DNA adducts and increase the risk of cancer. So we want to avoid that, and ashwagandha seems to help with that. So that's kind of a side effect. But a real effect is it promotes the growth of axons and dendrites. Now, dendrites are the little things that stick out of neurons that the signals go into the cell, and axons are the little things that stick out of the cell that send messages away from the neuron cells in our brain. The axons in the substantia nigra are very long, and they go all the way down to the striatum. And so promoting the growth of these axons is really quite critical. So there's a couple of reasons that you may want to integrate ashwagandha into your tea making, perhaps, or it can be put in stews and soups too. I recommend you do your own research. Start by reading these studies, which are also quoted in my book, and think about if that's going to be good for you. Remember that the food changes are probably number one and the biggest effect, but this can help too. They did a study in Iran, and they've used licorice, a fair amount of licorice, 136 milligrams, and tremors were reduced by half in 6 months. Their unified Parkinson's disease rating scores and their motor scores improved 10%, and during the 6 months, the controls got 10% worse in their scores. So the thing is, licorice root powder is very sweet. And we just bought some organic licorice online, and it's not expensive. The fun part is that if you add it to a tea, it's very sweet. So instead of using sugar, you can use licorice to sweeten your tea, and you get the side effect is that tremors can be reduced by licorice. So that might, and sugar is not that great, put in your tea anyway. So see if you like the flavor of licorice. If you do, I actually have some tea my wife made right here. It's got licorice as a sweetener. Really quite good. Now here's one, ginkgo biloba. The leaves of these plants contain certain components, and I only like to use the standardized extract of ginkgo biloba and most other medical plants too, because they're standardized. So every single capsule is the same. And they limit the ones that are not so good for you, and they raise the ones, the terpene lactones, 24% of each capsule is terpene lactone. So you're getting the good stuff in every single capsule, and they standardize on other things too. Ginkgo helped to restore dopamine levels and tyrosine hydroxylase, so you can make more dopamine. In the substantia nigra pars compacta, exactly where the dopamine is made, and in the striatum, where movement is initiated. It's also neuroprotective, and it reduces the free radicals like superoxide radical and eats up the radicals, and it blocks fatty acid oxidation, which I just talked about, which can be damaging to cells. If the fatty acids are oxidized in the cell membrane, then that cell can rupture and die. One caveat, you should not use ginkgo biloba with blood thinners, because one of the ways it works is to help blood penetrate deeper into the brain. It's used widely for helping people think clearer and get better memory, to the point where it's used by students when they're taking exams. And this bottle shown on the screen is something I made fairly recently. It's a ginkgo standardized extract mixed with a ginseng standardized extract. And this I made for people with problems with memory and thinking, and also low energy, especially in the afternoon. And I was happy to see the lab reports are extremely good on this, that it really does have exactly those standardized extracts that we want in here. Now, just briefly, I want to talk about homocysteine. It's an undesirable blood chemical, and it can be reduced if you take folate and vitamin B12. Folate's available in green leafy vegetables and beans, any type of legumes. And vitamin B12 is available in supplements and fortified food. It looks like vitamin B12 might be wise to be supplemented on whatever diet you're in. Excess homocysteine increases the risk of heart attacks. On the left, you'll see I did write a book on heart attacks called No More Heart Attacks. It's also available on my website for under $10. On strokes, see, people with Parkinson's disease generally don't die of Parkinson's disease. They die of the same things all Americans die of: heart attacks and strokes. And I wrote a book called Stop Strokes Before They Start. A lot of information on food and strokes in there. And Alzheimer's disease and other memory problems can happen with Parkinson's disease patients. And my book, Nutrients for Memory, outlines the Hawaii Dementia Prevention Trial, which I designed and ran at the Hawaii Alzheimer's Disease Center. And that outlines all of the things. And you can take these steps yourself. You don't have to pay me thousands of dollars, just slightly under $10, and I'll send you the book. If you're really broke, I'll send it to you for free. No problem. This study, though, showed that if you do take the vitamin B12, on the left, you see the levels of homocysteine were all above the safe level, except for one guy. And then after taking the vitamin B12 supplementation, just 5 weeks later, they were all just about down to the safe level. So there's no doubt that vitamin B12 really does help with this. And I certainly take it every day in my multiple vitamins. Okay, now we're going to get to something real interesting that it's unlikely your doctor has told you. Even if your neurologist is a movement specialist, he may not have been reading about how excess dietary protein interferes with the production of dopamine in our bodies. Many neurologists know that excess dietary protein can interfere with levodopa-carbidopa therapy. And that's why they normally advise people not to take their drugs near a meal. It seems like protein persists quite a bit of time after a meal and can interfere with the drug therapy if eaten in excess at any time. So we'll look at how dopamine is made. I've gone over some of this before. You start on the top left with tyrosine, and then with that enzyme I asked you to remember, tyrosine hydroxylase, you make levodopa. Or you can take levodopa drug. Both of these are inhibited from getting into the brain by excess protein. The levodopa is then made into dopamine. However, when you take carbidopa levodopa, when it's circulating in your body, the carbidopa prevents the levodopa from becoming dopamine outside the brain. The carbidopa is not allowed to go in the brain, so just the levodopa enters, and then it can be made into dopamine with the aromatic L-amino acid decarboxylase. You don't need to remember that one. And then dopamine is finally degraded with monoamine oxidase. One of the drugs used for Parkinson's disease, especially in the later stages, is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So then less dopamine is broken down. They use that for inhibition. Vitamin B6 is necessary for convert levodopa into dopamine. So normally people aren't deficient in that, but I'll talk about vitamin B6 again as we go along today. A study in the Journal of Parkinsonism and Restless Leg Syndrome showed that higher levels of protein can block levodopa entry into the brain 50%. So this is even if your blood concentration of levodopa are adequate. You take your levodopa, but it's not going into the brain. Half of it is useless. In other words, and studies have shown this, if you ate just the protein you needed instead of excessive protein, you may need half the levodopa, half of your drugs. And this can be very useful. In fact, a lot of the studies that lower protein have to check very carefully if people are getting too much of their drugs and then lower the dose accordingly. So they have to be supervised by a neurologist who can do this. And if you lower your protein very quickly, especially, then you'll want to be supervised by your neurologist so that he can recommend reductions in levodopa as necessary, because you're now allowing it to be made into your brain. The amino acids, all of the essential ones, are moved from the intestine into the bloodstream and also into the brain by this large neutral amino acid transporter. And the way it works is, if we eat a reasonable amount of protein, not too much, then the protein is transported into the bloodstream, and the tyrosine in the protein, it's an amino acid that's in proteins, broken down into amino acids, and the tyrosine can enter, kind of like an easy on-ramp onto a freeway that's not congested. When it travels up into the brain, there's another off-ramp into the brain, and if there's not a lot of traffic, that tyrosine can go into the brain. Tyrosine hydroxylase will make that into levodopa. You can make that into dopamine. So you're making your own levodopa and dopamine without the drug. This is also true of levodopa. It also is inhibited from going into the bloodstream by too much protein and into the brain by too much protein. As we saw with the last study, 50% less could enter the brain with all those other amino acids competing for it. Now, if you eat a normal excessive amount of protein, such as most Americans do, then it's going to be like rush hour. The tyrosine can't get into the bloodstream and it can't get into the brain because the off ramps and the on ramps are all clogged up. What can you do? Eat the amount of protein you need rather than excessive amount of protein. This is a chart, of various diets. SAD stands for Standard American Diet. And we have Atkins diet, the carnivore diet, paleo diet, very popular, bulletproof diet, South Beach diet, transition vegetarian diet, a Mediterranean diet, we hear a lot about that, a vegan whole food diet, and even a raw vegan diet. Now, the requirement for people over 50 is 46 grams per day of protein. Now, I want you to look carefully and tell me how many of these diets are below 46 grams. 0. None of the diets. Even the raw vegan diet had 81 grams of protein, almost double the amount needed. So really, the problem is getting down to the required amount of protein and not eating excessive protein. Look at this bulletproof, 235 grams of protein per day. Wow, that's really high. The carnivore diet is 3 times the amount needed. This excess protein interferes with our ability to create dopamine and for the drugs to work properly. Many studies have been showing that lower protein, adequate, but not low protein, helps with the symptoms. Here's 3 studies summarized. Protein per day, 56 grams. The response rate was 100%. They lowered protein to 77 grams, 100% response rate. And in that study, they had to reduce the levodopa drug 68 milligrams. The others, unfortunately, didn't report the reduced amount of levodopa. And the third one, 63 grams of protein a day, 100% response rate. As you saw from the chart above, 100 to 200 grams is typical. So none of these levels are below the amount we need. They're all above the amount of protein that we need, but they're not excessive. Now, there's a protein redistribution diet. Okay, a lot of people really love their meat and chicken and fish and high protein sources like cheese, and they don't want to do without them. So researchers came up with this system of redistribution. So in the morning, you eat a low protein breakfast, adequate but low. At lunch, you eat a low but adequate protein lunch. And then at dinner, you can eat a ton of protein. Well, what happens is that the symptoms are worse after eating protein. So people felt a lot better after breakfast. One man we educated was fairly advanced in Parkinson's disease, and his symptoms were getting into Lewy body dementia and really having problems. And his wife, because in the later stages of Parkinson's disease, people can get too thin. That's quite normal. She was feeding him bacon and eggs for breakfast, and big hearty breakfast loaded with protein and neurotoxins. So she decided that she could change breakfast and just feed him some oatmeal with berries, and he was happy with that. And we saw her uh, just a short time later and asked her, "How is it going? Have you noticed any changes?" And she said, I mean, we saw her a month later. She said, "Yes, his thinking has improved. It's twice as good. His movements have twice as good. Only changing breakfast." And then we asked her, "Well, how long did it take for these good results to show up? It's been a month." She said, "Well, it wasn't until the next day." So it didn't happen the first day. I love results like that. Um, so really, protein can have a huge effect. In this study, in the Archives of Neurology, they tried a low but adequate protein diet, and it prolonged the effectiveness of levodopa therapy. Now, if you have Parkinson's disease, you may know all about off times. So you may take your first dose of Cinemet at 8 a.m., and by maybe 9 a.m., it's already wearing off and you're starting to get tremors. And by 10, 11 o'clock before your next dose at noon, you're not feeling good. You're having problems, okay? But they found that this protein redistribution diet on time was improved by 4 times, which means that 8 a.m. dose might last until noon. Isn't that great? So it can really assist with the drug therapy. It's clear how it does it. It helps levodopa get into the bloodstream. It helps it get into the brain. There's no doubt about that. Walking speed was twice as fast, and the test scores were much better. This is people who only ate protein, heavy protein at dinner time. Again, a protein redistribution diet. 4 out of 5 people had less tremors when they delayed it. Now, they're still going to get more symptoms, tremors, and movement problems after dinner with the heavy protein. But of course, they're going to be asleep and maybe not so active at that time. So that's one of the reasons this worked. I think we could go a step further and not eat heavy protein at dinner either. But in this study, the protein before dinner was low. It was like 7, 10 grams of protein. And then at dinner, it was a lot. The response rate, it varied from 61% to 100%, with about 4 out of 5 people having less tremors. In one of the studies, they had needed 41% less levodopa. One needed 55 milligrams less. Another, they needed only 6 milligrams less, and the others didn't report the reduction in drug therapy. This is a great study that was done in Italy by Luciana Baroni as lead author, and it's a plant diet. The plant food diet improved motor performance in Parkinson's disease patients. How long? After 1 month on the diet, movement scores were about twice as good. The Hoehn and Yahr scale went from 1.96 to 3.5, and the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale went from 25 to 47. I mean, that's a huge difference in scores. Just about, cut the symptoms in half, basically. Movement scores were twice as good. It was also movement, not just everything else. Reduced protein increased the transport of levodopa and tyrosine into the brain. Here's another study on a plant-based diet. And this plant-based diet reported in Neurology, in most prestigious journal. The plant-based diet helped after only 1 week. Both tyrosine and levodopa were more effectively absorbed and transported to increase dopamine in the brain. Reduced dosage of the drug, in this case Cinemet, was sometimes needed. Fluctuations in symptoms were less off times. But do note that if you're going to go on your own protein redistribution diet, or if you're going to cut your protein from 150 grams a day to 50 grams a day, then you're going to need to very carefully monitor your drug intake and stay in close touch with your neurologist. He may recommend lowering your dosage as your symptoms improve and if you get side effects from excess drug. Another part of the reason why the plant diets are helping is that fiber assists with levodopa therapy. It also assists with constipation, which is a common side effect of Parkinson's disease. A diet that's rich in fiber is found to improve motor function and improve the effect of levodopa. So you get better drug effects. So excess protein reduces the effect of levodopa, and lots of fiber increases the effect. So you get more stable concentrations at higher levels and reduces the fluctuations in tremors and rigidity. And this less off times is a wonderful thing. Plant fiber is easy. I don't need to say plant fiber is only found in plants. So vegetables, fruits, legumes or beans of any kind, nuts and seeds, these are all great sources of fiber and great sources of all those other things that are protective. And especially if they're organic, they do not contain the neurotoxic pesticides and organochlorines and all those things that make the brain worse and damage our brains. A Brazilian study, it was mixed because they cut out red meat, that's all. I think they eat a lot of red meat in Brazil. Motor skills improved 60% in 6 months, with 50% of that improvement in the first 3 months. They also used 3 doses of vitamin B2, a fairly high dose of 80 milligrams 3 times a day. It's quite a bit. They didn't have a controlled group, but I thought it was interesting that just cutting out red meat had such a large effect. The vitamin B2 can recharge glutathione peroxidase that may slow down the damage to dopamine-producing neurons. Technically, they're called dopaminergic neurons. Now, this study looked at red meat and how can that be a problem? Advanced glycation end products are formed on meat when it's cooked by barbecuing, broiling, frying, or even baking if you get a glaze on it. And these advanced glycation end products, I've written papers on this, they're very highly inflammatory to the brain, stimulating the death of brain cells, including, of course, the neurobrains that make dopamine. Oxidized cholesterol is high in red meat. When you cook it, the cholesterol oxidizes, and the oxidized cholesterol, unfortunately, can transfer the blood-brain barrier and cause inflammation and damage to the brain. And then there's the lipopolysaccharides I mentioned earlier. These are the leftover dead bacteria in meat. And this leftover dead bacteria, we have cells lining our blood vessels that are looking for infection. Infection in the bloodstream can be very, very deadly, called sepsis. And if you have sepsis, you're going to need antibiotics really fast. Well, these surveillance cells, toll-like receptors they're called, are looking to see if there's any bacterial infection in our cells. They're fooled by these lipopolysaccharides. They see them because they are gram-negative bacteria as an infection. So they trigger an immediate, powerful response, a cytokine storm that will kill off the imaginary infection. And this can go on 3 times a day if you're eating red meat 3 times a day. I'll talk a little more about advanced glycation products and lipopolysaccharides as we go down, but they did find that these AGEs, advanced glycation end products, were 1.5 times higher in Parkinson's disease patients. The most dangerous meats are processed sausage, cured meat, chicken meat, and pork or beef patties. All animal products and animal fat have many, many problems. There are 2 studies here, one in oxidative medicine and cellular longevity in 2020, the other in redox biology, also 2020 study. And you can read more about this in those studies. So which diet is perfect for Parkinson's disease? People in the later stages of Parkinson's disease are going to need a lot of calories. They're going to be too thin, but how can you get a lot of calories and not get excessive protein? Okay, so that is something that may be a little bit difficult to do. So you need a hearty diet. You don't want to interfere with dopamine production with excess calories, so you need just an adequate protein diet. Limiting protein to the RDA of 46 grams per day or so is fine if you can get that low. People who try to do it, when I analyze their diet, even on a strictly vegan diet, typically are 70, 80 grams a day. So it's not easy to get that low. A plant diet can provide plenty of calories without excess protein. But will people change their diets? Working with people who try it, we find that they get good results. They will stick with the changes. If they don't try it, well, then nothing happens. Long-term compliance can be an issue. But this immediate relief from the motor symptoms and thinking difficulties can make dietary changes more acceptable. We worked with a man, when we met him, he was 35 years since he'd been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, walking with a big walking stick and taking drugs, it seemed like every few minutes. Wonderful man. He decided he wasn't very mobile, okay? He earlier in his life, he loved woodworking, had a woodworking shop next to his house, but he couldn't even get there anymore. So his wife changed his diet. And here's a quote from him. "We plan to continue the diet, and it has been helpful to discover it's not as hard to do as we anticipated. There's nothing like good results to keep us motivated. We were so happy to hear that this man, 35 years into Parkinson's disease, was able to go to his wood shop and do wood projects. Again, that was really gratifying for him and made him want to stick with the diet. So it doesn't cost anything to try a better diet, to limit your animal fats and to eat more plants. It's really pretty easy. I do want to mention mucuna pruriens. This is a bean that many people have heard actually contains levodopa naturally. In its natural form, it contains it. It has actually a high content. One study used mucuna on 60 Parkinson's patients for 12 weeks. Okay, the mucuna patients did twice as well on their Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale and twice as well on the Hone and Yar scale. However, they had to eat 6 7.5 gram doses. Now, 7.5 gram is big. A capsule typically might contain 1 gram. So they're eating like 8 capsules. It wound up to being 48 capsules per day, about a quarter cup. Because it is a bean, it caused some gastric disturbance. Okay, people were uncomfortable in their intestine. So this is a problem with it. They found that mucuna pruriens may have a greater bioavailability than levodopa and showed a more rapid onset of actions and a slightly longer duration of the therapeutic response. Tolerability was acceptable, but the gastrointestinal effects were a problem. Sometimes if you take too much levodopa, you get dyskinesias, uncontrolled movements. But these were not found in the mucuna-treated patients. However, I will mention that this trial was sponsored, so we have to take it with a grain of salt. Now, here's another study that was interesting because rural poor cannot afford drugs. So they grew the beans. The seeds were roasted, the bean seeds, in a pan for 15 minutes, peeled, ground, and sifted to obtain the powder. Now, what they did is they added the powder to a glass of water and let it sit for 10 minutes. So the patients drank the water, but left the powder in the glass. The water was well tolerated, no gastrointestinal problems. The water only contained 2/3 of the levodopa in the beans, so the amount of mucuna powder was increased, in this case, 50% to 127.5 grams a day. That's about 4 ounces of mucuna powder, really, quite a lot. But because they're only drinking the water, it didn't mess with their intestines. I have to caution you if you're thinking of switching from levodopa to mucuna pruriens. It can be very difficult to switch midstream. It could be very difficult to find a neurologist who's willing to work with you in this endeavor. I would consider mucuna pruriens something to consider if you've been diagnosed but are not yet on levodopa therapy and your doctor is suggesting levodopa therapy, and then in that case, you might be able to try this mucuna water and see if that's going to control your symptoms for a time until you do need drug therapy. And work with your neurologist very carefully and monitor your symptoms very carefully. It's not easy to switch from a prescription drug to a bean powder water. This is something that takes a great deal of expertise, and I would want you to consult your neurologist very carefully before undergoing any kind of a switch like this. But it is interesting that a natural product, there are other beans that naturally contain levodopa. I believe fava beans contain some levodopa too, and can just be included in the diet. This is the Neuroscience Nutrition Foundation, and I'm research director there. And we're working to stop Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, migraines, and other neurologic disorders with nutrition. I want to thank someone. We just got a generous donation. If you go to neurosciencenutrition.org, you can contribute to us. We'd love it. We're not supported by pharmaceutical companies. We just do our work. And this team here was for the Hawaii Dementia Prevention Trial, and none of us were paid for it. We all volunteered 2 years of our time to run this trial. I want to talk just for a few slides about Lewy body dementia. The Nutrients from Memory book is here in the center. That's on that Hawaii Dementia Prevention Trial. My wife's cookbook and my book can be helpful, all on my website, drsteveblake.com, and all can be bought in ebook format for under $10 so that you can afford them. Lewy bodies are clumps of aggregated proteins, alpha-synuclein proteins. They're inside neurons, and they can be present in higher levels in Parkinson's disease than normal. Dementia risk is higher with Parkinson's disease. After 20 years, it can be 24 to 80% higher. I will mention that it's still rare, but something that is undesirable. I just found a study on advanced glycation end products that were damaging to the Lewy body dementia. Skullcap herb is often used by people to go to sleep if they have nervous energy before bed. It should not be taken during the day, especially if you're driving or doing anything that needs attention, because it makes you sleepy. But it has these two flavonoids, bicolin and bicholine, that reduce dopamine depletion in the substantia nigra. They also hinder alpha-synuclein aggregation in Lewy bodies and lowers the toxicity of these Lewy bodies. So it's something to consider if you happen to need a sleep aid and you want to drink a little bit of this tea before bed. There have been times in my life when I had trouble sleeping, and I found that a short shot of a skullcap before bed really relaxed my brain and helped me to sleep. Another thing is resveratrol from red grapes. They reduce Lewy body dementia. They cleared the alpha-synuclein. That's great. And they're antioxidant too. And they can protect the mitochondria and sustain energy production. I know you're going to say, well, can't I just drink red wine? Well, you can, and you can get resveratrol that way. It is, however, much healthier to eat red grapes, and you can always use the disappearing grape trick. You pick the grapes off the stems and put them in a cup, set them next to a person, and that's the disappearing grape trick. They just seem to get eaten up. It's so easy to eat them. Turmeric, decreased oxidative damage and Lewy bodies. Turmeric has curcumin and other curcuminoids that lower alpha-synuclein and another clumping protein, synphyllin-1. So they reduce the toxicity of alpha-synuclein and perhaps can help stave off the Lewy body dementia. They promote the clearance and they help with oxidative damage. Turmeric is well known for being antioxidant. However, there are side effects of turmeric. Significant improvement in motor performance was the principal side effect. Okay, they also had a side effect of protecting the dopamine-making neurons against neurotoxicity. I like that. Reducing the loss of dopamine-producing brain cells. That's a good side effect. Reverse the depletion of tyrosine hydroxylase. That's the one that makes levodopa in our bodies. Reduced overexpression of pro-inflammatory cytokines in the striatum, right where movement is initiated. So these are the most positive side effects. Black tea and green tea also help to break down alpha-synuclein, reduce the toxicity, and reduce the risk of Parkinson's disease 25 to 50%. And if you sweeten it with some organic licorice powder, then you're going to have even better effect. Now, I'm going to talk for a little while about avoiding inflammatory foods. This paper in the Journal of Dementia and Alzheimer's Disease is right now undergoing peer review. So it is not quite published yet, although the preprint is available on my website under recent research. reducing neuroinflammation and risk of mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease, and by the way, also Parkinson's disease, by reducing three things: dietary lipopolysaccharides, dietary arachidonic acid, and dietary advanced glycation end products. These are the most inflammatory products found in food, and they all can be avoided. Reducing inflammation in Parkinson's disease is so critical that I wrote this paper in GSC Biological and Pharmaceutical Sciences, also available for free on my website under recent papers, working with a great team and many neurologists. Emerging evidence indicates that chronic brain inflammation leads to oxidation and death of dopamine-producing neurons. We know that now. Higher inflammation is associated with poor motor function. So impaired performance, impaired walking, more tremors. Inflammation is a bad thing. Reducing inflammation lowered the risk of declining activities of daily living, such as dressing yourself, walking around, going to the bathroom, fixing food. 54% reduction. Really good. This is a sort of complicated graph that my wife said I should include in this talk, even though I think it's a little complicated. You can reduce peripheral inflammation with dietary components, but this LPS, lipopolysaccharides or arachidonic acid, increases it. The AGEs, the advanced glycation end products, they increase brain inflammation, which then increases cytokines, which activate the microglia, which makes more cytokines. You're killing off your dopaminergic neurons, and you're getting the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So animal-derived food increase damaging inflammation. How to avoid it? We'll just eat whole plant foods. These animal fats, arachidonic acids, dietary fat, it's 20 carbons long, 4 points of desaturation. It's a omega-6 fatty acid that can be made into inflammatory leukotrienes and a prostaglandin called PGE2 that's highly inflammatory to the brain. These are killing off brain cells and also increasing pain and inflammation in your joints and inflammation in your arteries. That inflammation in the arteries can lead to atherosclerosis, blockage of the arteries for less penetration of oxygen and nutrients to the brain, and also strokes and tiny strokes known as vascular dementia. A good idea to avoid arachidonic acid. And can I say, if you don't eat animal fat, you're not going to get any arachidonic acid in your diet. Actually, it's not just animal fat. Animal tissue also has it. It's in the cell membranes, so it's in any kind of meat. Lipopolysaccharides, I mentioned a couple of times. Here's a study that I wrote on reducing dietary lipopolysaccharides to slow progression of cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease. It also slows the progression of Parkinson's disease. Meat, poultry, or fish, or milk, when they cook it, I mentioned bacteria are killed. And then these leftover membranes of the gram-negative bacteria, they trigger inflammation in the body and in the brain. The lipopolysaccharides are assisted in entering the bloodstream by excess saturated fats commonly found in meat, chicken, or cheese. And these two are packaged into chylomicrons and enter the lymph and then the bloodstream, and creating this terrible inflammation. This is actually, from the study in Journal of Brain Sciences that I was lead author of. Important trigger for Parkinson's disease. They did a test. One injection of lipopolysaccharides triggered Parkinsonian symptoms. And I mean, to give an idea of how potent this stuff is, when they're testing it on young, healthy people, they may inject 42 nanograms. That's 42 millionths of a gram. And it's enough to trigger massive inflammation in the person's body and to impact their ability to think and remember. 42 nanograms. You know how much is in a serving of, say, chopped turkey prepared dinner? 1.8 million nanograms compared with 42 nanograms. So the LPS triggers basically inflammation in the body, increasing the death of neurons in the substantia nigrum, the dopamine-producing neurons, and the striatum, the ones that increase movement. So basically, They increase tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 6, and interferon gamma, and they're very damaging. So avoid animal-derived food to slow the progression of Parkinson's disease. In fact, you might feel better instead of worse. I've mentioned advanced glycation end products, so I won't talk about it too much now, but they increase greatly oxidation and death in brain cells. And here's a study on that. I did write this study. I also quoted another study on advanced glycation end products. Sources: fried, barbecued, or broiled chicken, beef, pork, or fish, and aged cheese. They're misfolded proteins, and they are very much a problem and good to avoid. Trigger the brain receptor for advanced glycation end products, named RAGE, appropriately named RAGE, higher risk for Parkinson's disease and development of Parkinson's disease. The bottom line: avoid chicken, fish, and hard cheese. So here are some anti-inflammatory nutrients. The first one I'm going to mention is short-chain fatty acids. When our bacteria process the fiber, they make short-chain fatty acids like butyric acid and capric acid. If you want to know more about fats and oils, I wrote this textbook called Fats and Oils Demystified. You can find it on my website for under $10. And it's a big book and everything about fats and oils. There's so much misinformation now on fats and oils, but it would be good to learn the various saturated fats from butyric acid up to stearic acid and the omega-3s and the omega-6s, and learn more about them. Curcumin from turmeric is anti-inflammatory, resveratrol from grapes, genistein from soy, sulforaphane from kale and other cruciferous vegetables, broccoli and cauliflower and all those. Ginkgo and ginseng reduce inflammation and oxidation. Vitamin E has a strong protective effect. I'll mention that in a minute. And S-adenosyl methionine increases glutathione, protective. And I mentioned polyphenols too, like flavonoids. So I'm going to talk for a minute about antioxidants. Why Parkinson's patients need more. All this tremoring and rigidity is something that creates more oxidation. So you need more antioxidants. Nerve inflammation can increase your need. As Parkinson's disease progresses, antioxidants are used up. Oxidation can lead to less dopamine production, principally by killing off the dopamine-producing cells. Selenium can protect dopaminergic cells. I analyze diets, and not everyone, even myself, gets selenium every single day. So I take a special multivitamin that has all of those nutrients in it to make sure I get enough every single day. It's a must-have to prevent cell death. Antioxidants in food include carotenoids, vitamin C in fruits and vegetables, vitamin E in nuts, seeds, and avocados, and polyphenols in berries and whole plant foods. And we have our own antioxidants that we make. I mentioned superoxide dismutase and glutathione peroxidase. Now, on the left, we have my book, Vitamins and Minerals Demystified. This is a McGraw-Hill College textbook that I wrote. And if you want to know about the essential vitamins and minerals, they're essential. And you can get this book. It's a little more than $10 on my website. Sorry. You have to buy it through McGraw-Hill. The brain and body food I produced for the Hawaii Dementia Prevention Trial with lots and lots of brain protective antioxidants and also other things like vitamin B12 and folate that protect against the buildup of amyloid plaques in Alzheimer's disease, and basically all of the essential vitamins and minerals. But I designed it from a standpoint that they would be the best forms and the best amounts, not the forms best for profits. For example, the vitamin E I used in this is not used in any other supplements because it's expensive and it's real and not fake. Antioxidants in diets. Vitamin E on the right is red and low in just about every diet. It was high enough in the vegan whole food diet because they're eating nuts and seeds, and the raw vegan diet had the most. Vitamin C is low in many of the diets. Atkins' diet was the worst on that one. And then if they're in green, the Zone, Paleo, South Beach, and of course the vegan diets were high in vitamin C. Beta-carotene lowered risk in this study of Parkinson's disease, a big study, 84,000 people, 14%. vitamin E, they only got 6 to 8 milligrams a day. The requirement is 15, the lowest. But they got lowered risk 13%, even with that tiny amount of vitamin E. And vitamin C lowered the risk 9%. Again, not a large amount. So they did find a protective effect of these antioxidants. This study looked at large doses of vitamin E, and it delayed the progression of Parkinson's disease 2.5 years. Vitamin E is very protective of brain cells, including dopamine-producing brain cells. The vitamin E sticks its little fatty tail into the brain cell through the membrane, into the middle of the membrane that's fatty, and neutralizes free radicals that could kill that cell. It only works once, and then vitamin C has to come along and recharge it. But it doesn't work if it's fake vitamin E, which is what you'll find in virtually every supplement called vitamin E in the US. If you want real vitamin E, it's got to say RRR-alpha tocopherol. If it says RRR before it, it's real vitamin E. If it does not say it, no matter what else it says, it's synthetic. Half of it are isomers that are completely worthless, and 3 out of the 8 are almost worthless, and only 1/8 of it is real alpha tocopherol. But delaying the progression of Parkinson's disease by 2.5 years is a laudable goal. So you make sure to eat your walnuts, sunflower seeds, and I do that, and I take the brain and body food. So I try and keep my brain healthy. In this study, vitamin E reduced risk by 55% and beta-carotene by 44%. These are nutrients from food, so they're getting a lot of other good nutrients from whole plant foods too. Now, vitamin B6 is used up in Parkinson's patients because of the drugs, and so it may be necessary to take that. Remember, there's an upper limit to vitamin B6, pyridoxine, is 100 milligrams per day. We don't want to go over that from all combined sources, breakfast cereals, fortification, and other supplements. Now, vitamin D is helpful. Most people would benefit by taking vitamin D, not too much, and only in the vitamin D3 form, but they found that low vitamin D levels correlated with worse tremors, rigidity, postural instability, that leaning back feeling, and bradykinesia, the slow movements. It was interesting because when they supplemented with vitamin D3, the patients got better, measured by the Hone and Yar stage. And when they got vitamin D from food, it increased Parkinson's risk, probably because of the polychlorinated biphenyls and other contaminants in the fish. Now, coenzyme Q10, we did use in our Hawaii dementia prevention study, and this is a powerful antioxidant we make in our bodies, and it can also be supplemented. This study recommended quite a high level, 1,200 milligrams. It doesn't seem to have side effects, but in our study, we used just 200 to 400 milligrams. So summing up, eat plenty of berries, grapes, and other fruits. Increase bell peppers, kale, and cabbage. Include sesame, tahini, organic soy products. Stay away from animal fats and animal protein, and buy organic to avoid pesticides. It's important that we have antioxidants to protect our brain cells because that's how they die off from oxidation. So vitamin C, real vitamin E, enough selenium, copper, zinc, and manganese. All of these I put in my supplement, which I will disclaimer, I do make a small profit on it, but my goal is to have something that I want to take and I'm willing to recommend. And as author of a college textbook on vitamins and minerals, very hard for me to recommend a multivitamin. So dietary protocol. Remember, reduce protein to necessary levels, not that extremely high levels that most people take. Avoid those animal-derived foods. Increase your antioxidants by plant foods, bell peppers to retain dopamine, and reduce Lewy body formation with turmeric, possibly coenzyme Q10 and skullcap if you need a sleeping aid. And that is reaching the end of my slideshow. Please go on my website to take a look at my available studies, recent research. Under the pictures, you'll see that free link. Also, I have books available for the ebooks are always under $10, except for the McGraw-Hill one, which requires to pay a little more. So thank you very much for your attention. My goal is to help you with this in ways that your neurologist can't. So I hope it's been helpful, and I'm now ready for questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Blake. That was very informative. All right, so you shared all of your information, how everyone can get in touch with you and where they can find your books. So that's great. Um, so let's hop right into the Q&A. So you mentioned a term called facial masking. What is facial masking?
Facial masking is one of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, where earlier in life someone may have dimples and creases in their face, and the facial masking is because the muscles are tensed in the face. It looks more like a mask. And we worked with one man. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. They put him on levodopa, but he had hallucinations and other problems, couldn't take the drug. So they sent him to us, and we had him change his diet, and he did all the things I just mentioned. And it was fascinating to see that his facial mask disappeared and his dimples and wrinkling of his face came back. Also, his postural instability, which is where you feel like you're going to tip over backwards, went away. His tremors disappeared too, which is really fantastic. And it's without drugs.
Wow. Another term that you mentioned was Parkinsonisms, things that are similar to Parkinson's. What else would those things be?
Well, when neurologists diagnose Parkinson's disease, they want to make sure that it's really Parkinson's disease and the tremors are not caused by something else. So they basically normally challenge with levodopa. And if levodopa disappears the symptoms, they know it's Parkinson's disease. If it doesn't, it may be another form of Parkinsonism, and then that may require different treatment. And that would not be as my talk today would not be as relevant to those other forms of Parkinsonism. I'm really talking now about Parkinson's disease specifically. Thank you.
Okay. So is it under the same umbrella? It's just not the main thing that the levodopa responds to?
Yeah, the symptoms can be similar in Parkinsonism, whether it's Parkinson's disease or another cause of those symptoms. And a lot of times it's a neurotoxic poisoning that can cause Parkinsonism.
Okay.
Paraquat exposure is very common.
Oh, really? Okay. Thank you. And paraquat is a pesticide?
Yeah, that's a persistent pesticide, a really bad one.
So, how long has Parkinson's been in the medical literature?
Extremely rare. And I know that medical doctors I talked to, the older ones, had never heard about it in medical school because it was so rare. But then with the advent of chemicals, we're seeing it much more. And it seems like it's not a big genetic factor. Okay. Very rare to find Parkinson's disease from a genetic perspective. Well under 5% of cases are genetically contributed to. So it's really an environmental problem, not a genetic problem. And it seems to be made in the 20th century and 21st century here with the environmental pollutants we have.
Okay. So is it the rise of industrialization that basically caused a brand new disease?
It existed a little bit before industrialization, but the widespread use of these persistent organic pollutants, including the organochlorines, the polychlorinated bipheноls, the DDT, breakdown product DDE, the dioxins, these are the chemicals that can damage and kill off brain cells and the dopamine producing brain cells, creating Parkinson's disease or the thinking and cognition brain cells that can produce Alzheimer's disease. And they're avoidable, largely avoidable.
Is there any good way to detox from these chemicals?
Yes, yes. They normally are slowly released by our bodies if we're not constantly exposed to them. They are stored in our fat cells. And so if you fast and don't eat food, then the fat cells will be burned up and they will dump these toxic organochlorine pesticides into your bloodstream. Now, if it's a water fast, you have no antioxidant intake. And so this will damage your bloodstream and your brain greatly as they're being eliminated, which is why I would never recommend water fasting. I know some experts do. But I've been trained in European naturopathy where fasting is an art and a science. And so what they do there is the Buchinger method of fasting, where you're taking fresh vegetable juices and vegetable broths like potato broths, carrot broths, and also some herbal T's too, so that you're protected. Your bloodstream is protected while you're undergoing the fast and while you're eliminating these toxins from your fat cells into your blood.
So what kind of damage would you expect to see from someone doing a water fast to detox?
Well, the damage when you put neurotoxins in the bloodstream and have no antioxidant input at all is to the arteries, to the kidneys, and to the brain.
Okay. And the reason I
That's
asked,
the damage.
I don't know if you're familiar with Alan Goldhamer's work.
Very, very familiar. I've read his research, I've listened to his talks, and I understand that pure water fasting is more powerful than the Buchinger method, but not by much. But it's also very dangerous, and that's why I would never recommend it. And I wish that he would study the Buchinger method of fasting and then protect people while they're fasting. The results are also very, very excellent. But the short-term effects of water fasting are great, just like they are with Buchinger fasting. But the long-term effects could be problematic. So, which is why I never recommend anything that can hurt people. I did take the Hippocratic Oath and I really live by it. Only safe therapies. Buchinger fasting is very safe. It's the safest possible way with the fresh vegetable juices, the broths. Also, when you fast, your blood becomes more acidic. And that's a tendency of these acidic toxins to congregate. And the broths, with their alkalinity, helps to alkalize the blood and helps the body go through this period again, without damage to the kidneys, the eyes, the bloodstream, and the brain.
Can you spell Buchinger, please?
Buchinger. He's written many studies, and there are Buchinger fasting clinics throughout Germany and Europe and all around the world. And these studies are very, very easy to find. I've actually sent them to Alan Goldham.
Okay. Maybe we'll have to get you guys on a panel someday. So, so what are some common misconceptions of Parkinson's?
I, I don't know.
That it catches.
I mean, it's not communicable, if that's a problem.
Do people
Except
often think it's genetic?
it's no, the genetic component is very small, very tiny amount is genetically transmitted. It can be transmitted, however, through the dinner plate in families.
There you go. No, I mean, but when the general public, you don't think the general public generally has misconceptions about Parkinson's?
I don't know what that would be.
That,
If you have one in mind, let me know.
well, I guess one thing that was somewhat controversial is um, the shaking, and there was a controversy a while back with Michael J. Fox and his tremors, and some people accused him of going off his meds, so his tremors were worse, and he said actually it's my meds that make my tremors actually worse. Are you familiar with that controversy or that concept? Did the meds impact or make worse the shaking?
Well, I mean, one of the main purposes of the carbidopa levodopa is to reduce tremors.
Mm.
And if dosed properly, now Michael J. Fox is very, very advanced, many decades. He's had Parkinson's disease, and drug therapy is very difficult at advanced stages. There are several different drugs that have to be used interchangeably. Typically, the side effects from excess levodopa therapy are dyskinesias, which are uncontrollable movement effects. Maybe a head moving around. But the whole idea is the neurologist should be able to adjust his dosage. Now, if drug therapy no longer can work, there is deep brain stimulation, which is brain surgery where they implant a stimulation points in the brain, and then there's something like a pacemaker that controls it. And this is very advanced. And if drug therapy no longer works, then deep brain stimulation can be considered.
And what are early signs of Parkinson's that people should be on the lookout for?
Well, I think the earliest sign would be shaking during movement. So if you're moving your hand and it's shaking, that would be a sign of Parkinson's disease. Whereas if you're shaking without moving, that would be a sign of essential tremor, which is very, very common. Millions and millions of people have essential tremor. I mentioned Harmane, and if you avoid beer, cigarettes, and animal products, animal dry food, then you can greatly reduce your Harmane intake and possibly not shake. There are many other approaches to essential tremor too, of course. So sometimes slow walking, called bradykinesia, where your walking is impaired. I work with a neurologist who's actually a co-author on some of my papers, Thailand neurologist, one of the best movement specialist neurologists I've ever worked with. And she can see a man walking across the street and say he has Parkinson's disease. It's that obvious.
Okay, wow. So to organizations like the American Parkinson Disease Association and other large Parkinson's disease organizations, do they follow the same type of protocol or suggest the same type of protocol that you do?
No. Why would they? They're funded by pharmaceutical companies and their only interest is profit. Why would they have an interest in helping people with non-profitable remedies? I can tell you, I specialize in non-profitable remedies, and changing diet is just not a way to make money. So I have not seen any interest. I have talked for, let's say, I was a keynote speaker for the Hawaii Parkinson's Association, and they let me tell people about this. But basically, those organizations are usually fully funded by Parkinson's disease.
And how do other doctors, when they hear about your stuff, your protocol, when for example, at the Hawaii Parkinson's Disease Association, how did they respond to it?
Oh, I think neurologists are generally thrilled when their patients come in and say, can you cut my levodopa in half? I'm getting dyskinesias. I changed my diet. And they're curious and interested and happy that the patient needs less of his drug and his symptoms are improving. In the rare case in early Parkinson's disease where someone is able to actually stop taking levodopa, they're even more thrilled. I mean, this is wonderful. And neurologists are wonderful people who want the best for their patients, but they have not been trained in nutrition. I just talked to Dr. Josh, Harvard-trained MD, and he said 2 hours of nutrition is all he got in medical school.
So you talked about ashwagandha. So we had someone that spoke about ashwagandha a little earlier. And he said all ashwagandha, just to get into the country, is this is for turmeric as well, because it's produced overseas, is irradiated as it comes through. Is that a problem at all?
I would be careful to get organically grown ashwagandha, carefully prepared from a reliable source. I believe it's not grown in America, but you could possibly look for a local source of that. It's good to get a high quality one. Irradiation, I don't know. I know some spices are irradiated as they come in the country, and I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the effect that would have on the ashwagandha.
Okay. And how should we take the ashwagandha? I personally have a powder and I just shoot it back with some water. But I'm probably a little crazy when it comes to that stuff. What are easy ways of putting that into our diet?
Oh, I think the easiest is to put a chunk of the root in a stew and let it simmer along with the potatoes and carrots and onions. And then, of course, it might be a little too tough to chew. You might have to pull it out, just like the turmeric root that you might throw in that stew, too. But the advantage is you're getting a nice extraction of the wonderful components, and it's not bad tasting. It's kind of mild, like a potato.
Oh, great. You talked about standardized extracts. What does it mean to be standardized, and how can we tell if it's standardized? You were talking about that with regard to ginkgo biloba.
Yeah, it's easy to tell. It says standardized extract on the label. If it doesn't say that, it's not. Standardized extract. See, the problem here is that when a plant grows, say a ginkgo plant grows, some of the plants may get more sun, others less sun, some more water, some less water, some more fertilizer, some no fertilizer. So they have different active constituents in the leaves. Then they harvest the leaves and they make a tea out of it. And one person says it doesn't work, and another person says it works great. This is herbal therapy, but it's not being careful. Now, really good herbalists and good companies can control for these things, but the best way and the best research is on standardized extract. So with ginkgo, there's 3 different components that are standardized upon the ginkolicides are kept under 1% because they're not so desirable. And then the terpene lactones are kept to 24%, and one other component is kept to 6%. So every single capsule works the same. And honestly, I've tried my own ginkgo ginseng capsules, and I'm kind of like you. I open the capsule and toss it in, and it is incredibly bitter, with really a nice stimulating effect that lasts for hours, and a brain stimulating effect too. I don't need it often, but if I have a really long day at the Maui Memory Clinic and I'm seeing lots of people, and I know I'm going to be really tired by the time it's time to drive home, I'll take some. And I do notice the side effect that it brightens my brain up too. Nice side effect.
So you can just take it when you need it with ginkgo biloba?
That's how I do it. Yes. People with, you know, descending into Alzheimer's disease with mild cognitive impairment, in our clinical trial, we gave it to them every day, you know, for 9 months. And as I did mention, though, ginkgo should not be taken if you're on any type of blood thinning or anticoagulant medication. Warfarin, Xarelto, Eliquis, any of the anticoagulants you should not mix and match those two. There's some controversy, but I want to stay on the side of safety. And because ginkgo itself, it does help the blood thin and penetrate into the brain, and that's one of its mechanisms of action, getting those nutrients and oxygen in where it's needed.
Great. You talked about the relationship between, or actually, you talked about restless leg syndrome. What is the relationship between Parkinson's and restless leg syndrome, if there is any?
No, really, they're different, different causes. Yeah,
Oh.
different problems entirely.
So why did you bring just for
I
clarity?
didn't bring it up, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I could have sworn you brought it up. What is the difference between Lewy body dementia and Alzheimer's?
There are several kinds of dementia. There's frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, Alzheimer's dementia, and the pervasive one, which is vascular dementia. And I think in all cases, vascular dementia is a component because that's where the arteries get clogged up from excess saturated fat from either animal products or coconut oil. And that excess saturated fat makes it difficult for perfusion. So the blood can't get into the brain as much because the arteries are clogged up. And also, the vascular dementia is where you have the plaque can break away and tiny strokes occur here and here and here all over the brain, thus impacting your ability to think and remember. This adds up to vascular dementia. Very, very common on the American diet, or the Western diet, as we call
it. So you named a lot of different substances like resveratrol, for example. Are there any recommended dosages that you can provide for those?
Oh, yes. My favorite dosage for resveratrol is you pluck the grapes off their stems and put them in a big cup, and you set them right next to your chair. That's the recommended dosage. Red or black grapes, not the green ones.
Okay. We had a speaker on just before you, and he went over a very detailed dosage methodology and said red grapes couldn't provide enough. And so that's why I was kind of asking, and it was an extremely high dosage to the point where a lot of people were looking online to see if they could find some, and they're like, we can't find any of that dosage. So,
well, it's not just the resveratrol in the red grapes, though. Sorry for interrupting. But the thing about the red grapes is they have anthocyanins, and those are going to penetrate through the blood-brain barrier up into the brain and provide anti-inflammation and antioxidation, stay resident in the brain, protecting it. That's why the blueberries and the red grapes are so powerful. The resveratrol is a side effect that just happens to help with Lewy body dementia.
Okay. All right, great. So natural whole sources are good enough, is what I'm hearing.
Organic, please. Because grapes are sprayed right on the surface of the food. I only eat organic grapes. I love them. I eat them whenever I can. But if they're not organic, I don't even go close to the bin.
Yeah, I try to avoid the non-organic grapes. I find it very hard to get organic grapes. So even stores that sell organic raspberries, organic blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, they don't seem to have, at least in New York, don't seem to have the organic grapes. It's a little challenging.
We can usually find them at health food stores and occasionally at Costco and other box stores. But yeah, they're harder to find, but I think worth it.
What percent of calories should come from protein?
10%, that's fine. 10% is equal to, in a normal diet, about 50 grams of protein, depending on the caloric intake of the person. But 10% is widely agreed on. If you look at the European standards, the US standards, the Australian standards, all around the world, they've come down to saying this is the right amount of protein. However, nobody gets that little. And when I recommend that little, nobody can get there. It's really hard to get that little protein. Everybody says, where do you get your protein? Well, I've personally been plant-based for 55 years. So that's how long people have been asking me, where do I get my protein? And I get plenty of protein. I average, let's see, 73 to 85 is my typical protein intake. I need 46. I don't
Okay.
need any animal products. I don't need anything people would call protein except beans and nuts and seeds. But protein's also widely available in grains. Whole grains are a nice source of protein. No, everybody says it's a carbo, but it's actually a very complex structure with vitamins and essential minerals and protein, all kinds of things.
So if we are just eating a whole food plant-based diet, we don't need to worry about adding in protein. Just that will give us enough protein, that 10%.
I have analyzed many, many plant-based diets, and the only one I found that was low in protein, 35 grams versus the young man needed 56, under 50. And he was on a fruit-only, raw-only diet, and he got 35 grams a day. He seemed to be doing okay, but long-term effects of protein is very important for enzymes and very important for healing. And I think that the RDA is a bare minimum, so I would stick to that. And it does vary a little bit. The beauty is, though, if you work out really hard, you're going to eat more food. So 10% of calories winds up to more grams of protein. And as you eat more, you'll get more. And also, if you're hungrier, you're going to want a deeper protein. And I highly recommend beans, any form of beans, hummus, edamame, green beans, any kind of beans. Refried beans are one of my favorites. Those beans are great for keeping the protein and a lot of other nutrients at great levels without getting excessive.
Two really quick questions. One, for curcumin, could we just eat the turmeric and not have to worry about getting like a curcumin extract from the turmeric?
It's difficult to absorb the curcumin from the turmeric. And so my favorite way is to get we actually can grow the roots here, but you can buy the roots of turmeric. They're about the size of your thumb, and chop them up and put them in with black pepper. The piperin in the black pepper aids the absorption of the curcuminoids. So that's one way to do it. If you're taking capsules of turmeric, they're going to need to be specially made for absorption. I've seen some studies that showed virtually no absorption of this fatty molecule into the bloodstream. So those people are really wasting their money on those particular ones. Curry is a great way.
Great. And then last question is selenium. Brazil nuts, eating a couple of Brazil nuts a day, is that a good source? And is that enough?
Couple would be too many. There's an upper limit for selenium, and 2 would be too many per day. Look at the upper limit of each important mineral. They have an upper and a lower. You have to stay in that range. Too much is toxic, too little, you're not going to be able to make glutathione peroxidase effective. So you need to be in the right range. Again, for me, I take the brain and body food, so I know my selenium is always fine, even if one day the nuts and seeds I'm eating don't happen to have as much selenium. Sometimes different foods have selenium in them. You just have to. My way is I analyze my diet and other people's diet with the diet doctor. I look at every mineral and say, this one's low, this one's high. Zinc, selenium are often low. Manganese can be low. On a paleo diet, magnesium would be low, and calcium way low. So really the only way is either A, analyze your diet and find out what's low and then eat the foods that you should, or B, take the brain and body food like I do, or some other multivitamin if you can find one with the real stuff in it, and then you're safe, you're covered.
Great.
I do both. I eat great food and I supplement a little bit too. That's all I take. I just, nothing else, nothing fancy.
Great. Thank you so much for all the information that you shared with us today. If we could unmute the audience, please. So that
Thank you, Dr. Blake.
I
Pharmacist.
see three dots.
Thank you, Dr. Blake.
Very helpful.
Dr.
Thank
Blake.
you.